On this Tuesday night, the damning indictment of Quebec's healthcare system. A coroner's inquest concludes racism contributed to Joyce Echaquan's death. Her family's next steps.
The battle is not over.
Accusations of putting profits over safety.
Facebook's products harm children, stoke division, and weaken our democracy.
A whistleblower's blistering testimony and the social giant's denials. Rapid COVID-19 tests coming to the classroom.
This is an extra tool to keep our children in the classroom.
Ontario's new strategy in some schools. And a flashback of the life that no longer exists. The unique fundraiser for Afghanistan's female journalists.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. A Quebec coroner says she believes if Joyce Echaquan had been a white woman, she would still be alive today. While the Indigenous mother of 7 lay dying in a hospital, she recorded healthcare workers making racist remarks. Today, the coroner who presided over an inquiry into Echaquan's death explained why systemic racism proved to be a fatal factor. Mike Armstrong has our top story tonight and a warning, the details are disturbing.
Je suis désolée.
Coroner Gehen Kamel apologized and held back tears, talking about the toll her investigation took on the family of Joyce Echaquan. The death of the Atikamekw woman, a mother of 7, she says, didn't have to happen.
Son décès est directement relié.
The coroner says Echaquan's death was directly related to her hospitalization at the Joliette Quebec Hospital and could have been avoided. By the time Echaquan shot this horrifying and now infamous video on Facebook Live, staff at the hospital had already made a crucial mistake. When she was admitted, a nurse identified Echaquan on her chart as a drug abuser in withdrawal. That wasn't the case. Echaquan had gone to hospital with stomach pains and would die 2 days later of a buildup of fluid in her lungs. That would happen after staff insulted her in the video, laughing and telling her she was better off dead and only good for sex.
Pensez-vous que...
Asked flat out if Echaquan would have been treated differently and still be alive today if she'd been white,
Je pense que oui.
the coroner said simply, I think so, yes. Echaquan's family says it will, in the coming days, launch a civil lawsuit against the hospital. Their lawyer says it was the staff's prejudices that led them to believe Echaquan was a drug abuser.
This information was entirely erroneous. And because of that label that she was given, she was denied the health care that was required by her condition.
Capacité du cœur.
Now, the coroner is making a series of recommendations in this case. One of them is that the province recognize systemic racism. Well, that term is something the Premier pushes back on. François Legault admits there was racism from the staff, but insists it's not bigger than that.
For me, a system, it's all the system.
We have a lot of work to do.
The Atikamekw chief says the Premier's resistance means more dialogue is needed. But for the family on this day, there is progress. Echaquan's husband says part of their healing comes through truth, and more of that truth is now seeing daylight. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
NDP ethics critic Charlie Angus is calling on Justin Trudeau to keep a high-profile Liberal out of cabinet. Less than a week after Prime Minister Trudeau was spotted walking the beach in Tofino, BC on the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, Angus laid out his recommendations for how Trudeau should move forward.
In order to show that the government is serious about a new direction, the Prime Minister needs to ensure that Carolyn Bennett is no longer in the cabinet, because it was under her watch that the government spent millions in the cover-up of the St. Anne's legal abuses.
Survivors from St. Anne's Residential School in Ontario are locked in a legal fight with the federal government and the Catholic Church over compensation for the abuse they suffered. The Ontario government is set to begin a voluntary COVID-19 rapid testing program in some schools. It's an effort to detect cases earlier and limit spread. 796 schools in Ontario have reported cases of COVID-19. That's about 16% of all schools in the province. In the past 2 weeks, there have been 1,600 new school-related infections. More than 1,400 were students. Right now, 6 Ontario schools are closed due to COVID-19. The plan is to screen unvaccinated students, which for now is any child under 12. Ontario's top doctors initially resisted the idea. Mike Drolet explains why they changed course.
1 month into the school year, Ontario's top doctor has seen enough. Starting next week, rapid testing will be rolled out to select schools where the risk of exposure to COVID-19 is deemed high.
If we're seeing a school that's in trouble, that's having consistent cases, that's at risk for closure, this is an extra tool to keep our children in the classroom.
The oddity is that it was only a few weeks ago that Dr. Kieran Moore rejected the idea of mass testing because of false positives associated with the rapid test. Besides, testing 2 million students a week was just too daunting. But while 81% of 12 to 17-year-olds in Ontario have had one dose of the vaccine and 73% are fully vaccinated, case rates among children under 13 continue to grow. That's where a group of Toronto area parents stepped in and launched their own testing program, an idea that began to snowball to other schools. They got their test kits through a program called Stay Safe, or at least they did until the government recently cut off supply.
Stay Safe was trying to open access, and the government seemed to be trying to close access. And, I think they've really responded to pressure. I think they've seen that there's a huge demand and desire for these tests among parents across the province.
It's a debate that's simmering across the country. In Quebec, rapid testing will be widely available beginning next week, a step BC has avoided thus far, although it is expanding its mask mandate to include all students kindergarten through grade 12. Ontario's plan has been met with mixed reaction because of its limitations. Public health can target hotspots, but testing is entirely voluntary.
Unless you say we need a negative test for you to come into school because we're in the middle of an outbreak, if most of the parents decide not to test their kids, then there's very limited usefulness in that test.
Ultimately, there was too much public demand for testing for Ontario's top doctors to ignore. And now they need to see results before making any more tough decisions. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Alberta is bringing back contact tracing in schools.
To do this, we'll ramp up rapid testing, initiate contact notifications, and increase the public reporting that families and many others rely on.
COVID cases are on the rise in Alberta among children between 5 and 11 years old in regions where vaccination numbers are low. Thanksgiving weekend will mark the start of a 2-week-long COVID-19 circuit breaker in New Brunswick. The restrictions go into effect at 6 p.m. Friday and apply only to hotspot areas. People in the affected zones will be limited to their household bubbles, and non-essential travel into those areas will be prohibited. Schools and businesses will remain open. New Brunswick's active caseload is higher than at any other point in the pandemic. There are more blistering accusations against Facebook. A whistleblower who worked as a data scientist claims the social media giant is driven by money and suffers from moral bankruptcy. Speaking at a Senate subcommittee, Frances Haugen accused the trillion-dollar company of using misinformation to incite hate. And as Jennifer Johnson reports, she puts the blame squarely on its founder, Mark Zuckerberg.
I'm here today because I believe Facebook's products harm children, stoke division, and weaken our democracy.
Time and again, Frances Haugen, the Facebook product manager and data analyst turned whistleblower, spoke firmly before U.S. lawmakers, making the case that Facebook continues to mislead the public about its own damning research and is overdue for regulation.
When faced with conflicts of interest between its own profits and the common good, public safety, that Facebook consistently chose to prioritize its profits.
Last month, Haugen filed anonymous complaints with federal authorities, claiming the social media giant allows misinformation because divisive news feeds receive more user attention, which allows Facebook to charge advertisers more.
The dangers of engagement-based ranking are that Facebook knows that content that elicits an extreme reaction from you is more likely to get a click, a comment, or reshare.
She also slammed Instagram, which Facebook owns, saying the company ignores its own evidence showing Instagram makes eating disorders and thoughts of suicide worse for young girls.
Facebook knows that they are leading young users to anorexia content.
Lawmakers have heard enough.
Mark Zuckerberg ought to be looking at himself in the mirror today. And yet, rather than taking responsibility and showing leadership, Mr. Zuckerberg is going sailing.
I've been arguing for some time that it is time for Congress to act.
Haugen left Facebook with tens of thousands of internal research documents she secretly copied while working in the company's Civic Integrity Unit. Facebook, which has 2.8 billion users worldwide, denies the allegations.
Since 2016, we've spent $13 billion on safety and security. We have 40,000 people working on safety and security.
But Facebook says it is open to more oversight. The White House says self-regulation by social media platforms isn't working, and it's past time for Congress to crack down. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Conservative MPs met in Ottawa today for the first time since their election defeat. The party saw 119 members of Parliament elected in last month's election, slightly less than it did in 2019. Erin O'Toole is facing criticism as leader. And as Michael Couture reports, some members of caucus are concerned he shifted the Tories too close to the centre.
Morning.
Welcome. Thank you.
Newly elected MPs and returning members of the Conservative caucus walked the gauntlet of reporters with one question on everyone's mind.
So do you still support Mr. O'Toole?
Absolutely, yeah.
But not everyone was offering a full-throated endorsement.
I support Erin O'Toole's vision for Canada.
That was Ontario MP Michael Barrett during the campaign, moderating some of those virtual town halls. And this is now.
It'll be incumbent on him to demonstrate that the lessons that caucus expresses today, that they're learned before we move forward.
Alberta MP Shannon Stubbs came to the meeting demanding answers.
Why we lost capable, competent Conservatives in urban areas. And I do want to hear a clear roadmap on how we are going to win those areas based on Conservative values, because Conservatives should campaign as Conservatives.
The Tories voted for the Reform Act, meaning the caucus has the power to remove O'Toole. But for now, he seems unfazed by the uncertainty.
This is not about a sword of Damocles hanging over my head. We're united as a team. This is about having a fair and transparent process that a team must have when it respects one another, for electing a chair, for making determinations about membership in the caucus and about leadership.
O'Toole might not feel threatened, but this Conservative strategist believes the leader needs to be careful.
Welcome to the Conservative Party. It's like being the turkey at the Thanksgiving dinner. Somebody's always nibbling at you and cutting a bit off of you and looking for the stuffing because it's so tasty.
O'Toole has committed to a full review of what went wrong during the election, and that will be led by former Edmonton MP James Cumming. In the meantime, the Conservative leader is keen to get back to work as the leader of the opposition and prove to his caucus he deserves to keep his job. Robin?
Mike Couture in Ottawa. Thanks, Mike. France has released a damning report looking at sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. An independent commission estimates that 330,000 French children were victimized by priests and church officials over the past 70 years. It is estimated that 80% of the victims were boys. The commission worked for 2.5 years listening to victims and witnesses, as well as going through church, court, and police archives. The head of the victims group is calling on the church for compensation. The Pope says he wants to see the Church of France embark on a path of redemption in the wake of the investigation. A new round of pipeline politics coming up. What Ottawa just did to keep the controversial Line 5 running. Let this be a crude history lesson for Michigan's governor. The Canadian government is invoking a treaty that dates back to the late 70s to prevent the shutdown of the Enbridge Line 5. That pipeline carries oil from Western Canada through the Great Lakes states to southwestern Ontario. As Eric Sorensen reports, the border battle is not only pitting Canada against the U.S., but economists against environmentalists.
The oil refined in Sarnia's Chemical Valley keeps traffic moving and buildings heated in much of Ontario and Quebec. So the Enbridge pipeline through Michigan is a crucial lifeline to the Canadian economy. But Michigan's governor has gone to court to bring an end to Line 5.
We bear all of the risk for a foreign company to just move their product through, and it's ridiculous. We got to shut it down.
The governor points to a separate Enbridge pipeline that leaked and badly contaminated a Michigan river 10 years ago, though Line 5's legacy is long and relatively clean.
Construction of the $90 million interprovincial pipeline
from Edmonton, Alberta to Superior, Wisconsin.
The first phase of the pipeline to the U.S. was built 70 years ago. Then in the early 50s, Line 5 was constructed through Michigan to Sarnia, Ontario. Between Michigan's upper and lower peninsulas, more than 6 kilometers of that pipeline crosses the Mackinac Straits. It's this sensitive area that most worries Michigan's governor.
The light oil and natural gas liquids delivered by our Line 5 pipeline.
Enbridge says there's never been a leak here and proposes to build a tunnel into the riverbed and bury the pipeline to protect it from rupturing. But Michigan wants to shut off the oil. So, Canada has invoked a 1977 nation-to-nation treaty, which Ottawa says prevents Michigan from interfering with in any way the transmission of hydrocarbon in transit. It shows how high the stakes are.
What if this was shut down in the next 2 or 3 months? This would truly be, chaos, dealing with people's lives in their homes.
But the U.S. has certain obligations to its treaty partner, the Canadians.
It's awkward for President Biden, who visited Michigan today. He doesn't want to offend Canada or Democratic progressives like Governor Whitmer. But Ottawa is forcing Washington's hand.
By invoking the treaty, Canada will ask the federal government of the United States to take control of the issue and preempt Michigan.
The treaty between Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau and President Jimmy Carter came during the energy crisis of the 1970s. The Americans wanted less dependence on Middle East oil and Trudeau's approval for Alaskan gas through this country. 44 years later, it is Canada that has turned to the treaty to ensure its energy can keep flowing. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Still ahead, how the pandemic is raising the bar for mental health benefits. Over the course of the pandemic, many Canadians have been struggling with their mental well-being. New polling from Ipsos shows 28% of Canadians admit their mental health has deteriorated. As a result, there is more demand for counseling and support. But as Anne Gaviola reports, benefits for workers are often limited.
I was doubting myself a lot, didn't feel like I could meet challenges head on the way that I usually could.
Amber Smith hit an emotional wall in February. She says it was taking a toll on her work and her personal relationships. So she tried something she's never done before. She started seeing a psychologist.
It's been, tough to feel isolated and like you don't have access to your friends and family in the way that you would. It was really hard to just feel like yourself.
Millennials and Gen Z are most likely to admit it's a struggle.
When you ask them to self-report their level of mental health, they are more likely to report it as poor or bad compared to their older counterparts.
There's been a huge spike in virtual therapy sessions at the Ontario Shores Centre for Mental Health, mirroring a trend seen right across the country.
We used to do about 400 virtual care visits a month pre-pandemic, and we are now doing anywhere between 4,000 and 6,000 virtual care visits a month.
Given how competitive the labor market has become, employers who want to keep and attract the best workers need to consider offering mental health benefits if they don't already, and increasing caps.
The majority of the plans still provide a fairly modest amount, maybe $500 a year in support for that type of coverage. And so, depending on your personal needs, it may not be enough.
I also value an employer, though, who creates an environment, like a workplace of well-being, where I know I can come to work and I can find support on those days when I don't feel myself.
The pandemic has raised the bar for mental health support in the workplace. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Up next, more than 1,000 words, the exhibit in support of women who can no longer practice their craft. Get this, a Russian actor and director are on a mission to shoot the first feature film in orbit. The Soyuz spacecraft has now docked at the International Space Station. The 3-person crew will spend about 2 weeks filming segments for the challenge. And by the way, NASA is working with Hollywood actor Tom Cruise to shoot a film in space later this year. Stunning photographs of life in Afghanistan are being sold in support of the country's female journalists. The images were taken over 2 decades by photojournalists, many of whom are no longer allowed to work under Taliban rule. As our Europe Bureau Chief Crystal Gumansing reports, the pictures of the past are being used to create hope for the future.
photos of a life that no longer exists. These images, commissioned over the years by the Associated Press, are poignant reminders in sharp focus of what's been lost.
Almost a very precious thing to hold on to, sort of, in a way, archive a world that seemed to be disappearing really fast.
Since the Taliban seized control of Afghanistan in August, women are noticeably absent from the streets of Kabul, and the majority of girls are no longer going to school. The Network of Women in Media India launched a photo fundraiser in support of women no longer able to practice their craft. Farida Nikhzad co-founded an independent news network, but with the Taliban's resurgence, she made the gut-wrenching decision to leave her husband and son and flee the country with her daughter. She's now in Canada.
I am here and I am happy that at least I have my pen and at least I have my voice and will continue this advocacy.
Advocating for press freedom and for women to be allowed to participate fully in society. The photography fundraiser has so far collected more than $70,000 US to support women isolated in their homes, unable to earn a living.
The main effort behind this fundraiser is, somewhere addressing the sense, and we've heard it through several women journalists who've said, the world has abandoned us.
The fundraiser offers Canadians and others around the world another opportunity to help improve the lives of Afghans. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday night. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight we leave you with a dynamic duo proving they'll go the distance to spread joy. Bach and Bhangra, together at last. Gurdeep Pandher dances in Yukon while Ireland's Patrick Dexter plays cello more than 6,000 kilometers away. What a great collaboration. Thank you for watching. I'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night.